Alright, so at this point, hopefully we're pretty familiar with this notion of sets and set operations and how we can visualize these sets using these things we call Venn diagrams. So what I'm wanting to talk about now is, sort of the, answering the age-old question posed to math teachers the world over. Where are we going to use this? So as it turns out, that very last thing that we mentioned, that formula for coming up with a cardinality for a union, kind of gives us a good bridge because I mentioned that the numbers I gave in that example, I got them from a previous Math 107 class where I figured out, what state students were from and whether or not they were first-year students. So the big thing we're going to be taking a look at here is how we can use Venn diagrams to help us sort out survey data. So imagine for a moment that I had sent my students a feedback activity in Moodle or posted something in SurveyMonkey or what have you. Is SurveyMonkey still a thing? Anyway, so I ask a two-question survey. Are you from North Carolina? Yes, no. Are you a first-year student? Yes, no. And we can take the numbers that we had in that last example and then sort of represent them using a Venn diagram. So, in case it's not clear, I'm taking for granted that you're already familiar with that thing that we talked about in section 2.1. So if not, hit the back button and go look. But anywho, so we can sort of take the two questions and sort of imagine them as sets and then think of our universal set in this instance as everyone who took the survey. So if you're wanting to draw a box around this thing Venn diagram style, my U for universal set would kind of go right there. And then I would have a couple of sets, N for, North Carolina residents, then F for first-year students. So hopefully those letters make sense. You could just use A and B if you wanted, but why not be a little more evocative? And so from here, we can kind of fill in the Venn diagram, not with individual entries like we did with the months of the year previously, but just filling in cardinalities, because they said there were a lot of students who took the survey, and maybe we wouldn't even have their names if we'd done the survey anonymously, so I can't fill them in quite like that. But what I can do is populate each of the four pieces of this Venn diagram with the cardinalities that we had to work with. So in that particular example, we had seen that there were 10 students in the intersection that were both North Carolina residents and first-year students. So we had 10 right there. And then we had 11 students in the set that were from North Carolina. So now at the moment, technically you might default to writing an 11 right there. But keep in mind, remember, we should have 11 people in the entire N circle in total. If I put 11 right there, how many do I have in the circle? That's right, 11 plus 10 would be 21. So in order to make sure we have exactly 11, we need to take care of these 10 people we've already accounted for. We can do that via subtraction, right? So 11 people that should be in the circle minus the 10 we've already got. We have one lone North Carolina resident sitting right there. All right, last, not quite last, but next, we should have 19 people inside that circle, right? Well, we've already got 10, just like we had before. 19 minus 10, just like we should have 9 right there. And this matches up with that, N of A union B formula I gave you previously. Sorry, dropped my marker. That we have 11 plus 9, 20 people in total in the union if I were just sort of to get rid of the boundaries. Now, imagining this were in fact a true survey, we normally want to fill in anybody who took the survey who wasn't in either of these groups. So in this instance, if I remember the class roll correctly, there were 4 more students in the class that didn't fall into either category. So I'll just put a number 4 down right there. And now I've sorted out my hypothetical survey data into a Venn diagram that kind of sorts it out and it gives us the ability to categorize things and look at the numbers a bit more concretely. As it turns out, this process we've just kind of laid out gives us a rather neat 3-step process for working with surveys and Venn diagrams. I'll write up the process here in just a sec. I apologize for the jump cut, but it probably wasn't a good use of my time or yours for you to watch me write this stuff, right? So these steps are also sort of coded into the PowerPoint slides I've got posted in Moodle, but here they are. So first order of business, make sure you've got the right number of sets defined. For some surveys, you'll only actually need 2 sets. Sometimes you'll need 3. We'll see examples of both, before we're done with this section. And keep in mind that you don't automatically need, like sets to answer both sides of a given question. Like in the previous thing, when I said, are you from North Carolina? Yes, no. If you didn't say yes, then I can assume you said no. So I don't need 2 separate, circles there. I really only need the one for people who said yes, they are from North Carolina. So keep that sort of thing in mind if it comes up. Next up, rather than trying to fill in individual, values as you can do with smaller things. Generally speaking, if you got the amount of responses you hope for your survey, it's probably not going to be practical to try to fill in all of the individual entries. So we're going to be filling in cardinalities instead. And I mentioned sort of my guiding principle here, just like when we were populating that Venn diagram before with the months of the year. Generally speaking, I try to start as far on the inside as I can and then sort of work my way outward. That way I kind of cover all of my bases as best I can. Every now and again, you have to treat things a little bit differently. We'll talk about that, later on. But for now, like I said, this inside-out principle, I think, is sort of that's just always how my brain has sorted this. So hopefully, it seems logical to you as well. Lastly, normally you don't just want the Venn diagram for the sake of having a Venn diagram. I mean, I guess it's the sort of thing that looks good, if you just need to have a chart to fill in some space. Most likely you'd ask the questions in the survey or whatever, for some particular reason. So there will be questions you want to answer based on the diagram, and then you're going to be able to use it to help you, parse the data appropriately. So there's our 3 steps. Feel free to pause if you need to, write them down if you feel inclined to do so. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and jump into another example. It's funny. It looks like I just left the, like a letter U up there. I'm basically using the board now as sort of that box I tend to draw around my Venn diagrams. So if you have not already gone and gotten the PowerPoint slides out of our Moodle course, please go ahead and do so. I don't really have the board space to write up the data for this problem and then try to squeeze in a legible diagram with the actual values in it. So I'm taking for granted you've got that available. Again, I'm a big boy. I can handle you pausing to go get it if need be. Anywho, so the idea here is we're looking at, it's labeled community service. I feel bad. I should call it community engagement. We have a Center for Community Engagement at Mars Hill, and they feel they'd be upset with me if they knew I just was still calling it community service. It's not really the right connotation. Anyway, so they're trying to plan out activities, hypothetically speaking. They didn't actually do this survey, but at the beginning of the semester, they asked students, somehow or another, what sorts of, engagement activities with the greater community they'd be interested in participating in. So they've asked, would you be willing to serve food to the less fortunate at a local soup kitchen, say, or perhaps you'd like to help build houses with Habitat for Humanity for folks in the area. So you get those 2 options. Again, yes, no for each one. And they look at the data. So they got 100 surveys in total. Of the people that they surveyed, 36 said they were willing to serve food. So there's one. 45 people were willing to build houses with Habitat. That's, another number. And then they had 14 people who said, yeah, I'd love to do both of those things. All right. So now maybe they're trying to get a feel for exactly, is this enough, possible options to engage students on campus for the semester? So we can take a look at that using, a Venn diagram. So we really only need 2 sets in this instance because we've only got the 2 activities, right? So we have, serving food. I'll call that S. Again, the letter doesn't really matter so long as you can tell them apart. Then we have H, for the people willing to work with Habitat for Humanity. All right, so as we try to fill out our diagram, we sort of, again, work on the inside and start out. This interior region, this intersection of the 2 sets, those would be the people who said, yes, I'm willing to do both activities. So thinking back to the data, looking at the slide, what have you, there are 14 people living right there. So we'll put 14 in that spot. Okay. So next up, as we start sort of working our way outwards, you want to go here, just like with that previous example, we don't just automatically write in 36, even though that was the number we saw, because 36 is the total number of people inside here, right? Right. So we've already got 14. 36 minus 14 means we should have 22 right there. And over here, following that same principle, we should have 45 folks inside the Habitat for Humanity circle, We've already got 14. 45 minus 14, that gives us 31. All right, we're not quite done yet. We're close, but not quite. So the idea here is, have we counted everybody, accounted for everyone who took the survey? No, we haven't. There were 100 surveys taken, and if you count up these numbers here, we've only got 67 people, covered. Where should the rest of them go? Well, they live outside both circles, right? So sort of like we did with those other months that didn't fall into either category, I tend to write the number down in the corner here. So here's our completed Venn diagram. Now, in terms of trying to answer questions based on it, most likely what your office might be looking for in this case is how many people in total were willing to do one of these two activities? Maybe both, but we want to know how many do just one. So you might end up looking at this, and if you just looked at the raw numbers, 36 plus 45, that's 81. That's over 80% of the people who took the survey. That's a lot, right? I mean, not quite, because again, like we said before, you're double counting those 14 people who did both. In reality, you can see, and we've already done the arithmetic here, 22 plus 14 plus 31. I can't write. So 67 people in total were willing to do one or the other. Again, remember, for the purposes of finite math, or includes and. So no, we're not throwing those out. If I wanted to talk about, just these outside regions, I would normally say do only one activity or exactly one activity, something like that. I tend to be very specific with that language. So we have 67 people who are willing to do one. That W is really bugging me, but I'm short on time. So now maybe they were trying to figure out, sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, how many people didn't want to do either of these things? Well, it's those folks, right? So if you were wanting to know who was interested in neither of the two activities, we had 33. So again, this is a markedly different picture than if you had just taken the 36 and 45 and added them together. 67% is lower than 81%, so maybe we want something else to toss into the mix. So that's our first couple of examples. I want to take a look at some more where we get a little bit more in depth and we have multiple things. So if you got the PowerPoint slides open, just click the next one and then click the next video.